Let's talk about points real quick. This is a really common question I get, and points have like kind of gotten in people's minds as it's almost like a bad word. There are times where it totally makes sense to pay at least a partial point. And let's start with what a point is. So 1 point is 1% of the loan amount. So I pulled up a scenario here just based on something relatively typical: $450,000 purchase price with 25% down. Maybe that's lower purchase price than average in the Northern Virginia market, but this gives you just a quick sample here of what this really means. So another word you might hear is the par rate. So 6.125% is today's par rate, which means the rate with no points. And so when people call and they're like, hey, what's the rate? That's really what they're asking. And so what's really confusing is if you serve that up to a Google search and you ask what the rate is, you're going to come back with all sorts of answers all over the place. And, a lot of those answers are going to be here with, massive amounts of points. So I could tell you that the rate today is 5.5%, but in order to get that rate, you need to spend about $5,900 in points to get it. So, whether that makes sense, which just very quickly looking at this, don't think it does, it's a question of whether or not you're going to pay yourself back for that over the life of the loan. So, you got to ask yourself a couple of questions. Are you holding on to the property for long term? Are you planning to sell it in 3 to 5 years? And so in which case, buying points really doesn't make a lot of sense. Now the question is, do you think there's a high likelihood that you might be refinancing sometime in the next 6, 12, 24 months, whatever it is, maybe several years? And so what I would say to that is also, if you think you're going to be refinancing within a year or two, then don't pay points. But there are times where like just a partial point might make sense. So, based on today's rate spread, my instinct would probably be to stick with either 6.125 or 5.99. But, if you were to buy down, it probably stops making as much sense at after 5.875. So one thing you'll learn or you'll see on the rate table is that it costs more, per increment the lower you go. And, this isn't something arbitrary. This is what's set by, kind of the end investors, which is Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And these rates go out to the lenders, and then, the actual margin for the processing and everything is added there. But this is like the raw sheet pricing. So in other words, you're paying more for a lower rate because the market is less excited about having that. And conversely, the higher rate that you get, the more credit you're getting. So in some cases, it actually makes sense to take the higher rate, take the credit and run. If you're exiting like in a year for whatever reason and you're buying a house, then take the credit. And then, you come out on top because you took the higher interest rate, but then you're selling. So you're not experiencing that interest rate for whatever longer than any term that you own the house. So anyway, there are times where it makes sense. I've got all sorts of tools and things to help make the decision on when it makes sense and when it doesn't. But really, it's all about me consulting you, and I can give you the best advice I can. So come and check it out. Let me know how I can help.